Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. While at ATX Fest this year, I got to watch a screener for an upcoming Lifetime series called You. Based on the novel by the same name, the series premiere isn't until September. But you can go read the book now and try to figure out, like I did, where exactly they want to find the balance on this adaptation. It's a dark story that deals with romance cliches, and I found the pilot to be a really compelling hour of television. I was thrilled then to sit down with the author of the book, Caroline Kepnes, the showrunner for the television adaptation, Sera Gamble, and stars Elizabeth Lail and Penn Badgley. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
So I really loved getting to watch the screener. I had not read the book, and I know that Joe would really judge me for having watched an adaptation, but not having read the book.
You do more than judge.
That's my fear. My real fear is what that judgment
Put you in that cage right there for 2 hours.
Could go terribly wrong. And Caroline, I heard you say that, for instance, love story is not cancer story. I think it was a quote I'd seen.
Wait, you said that?
It was an interview.
Yeah. Oh God.
From a year or two ago.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a gem of a quote.
Yeah, it struck me because of watching the series, and there's so much trust asked in the beginning of the show when you start to realize that no one thinks they're the villain in their own story, but Joe clearly is. And I had a moment of texting a friend of mine of like, I'm very uncertain about this show right now. The synopsis on IMDb makes it sound like a meet cute, and it's.
This speaks well of your character, actually. Yes, that you are ambivalent.
So I wanted to ask, who did you want to be the audience for the show? Who do you want to watch this?
Well, I want everybody to watch it. But it's interesting because this show will premiere on Lifetime. But I think that there is a lot in our show for men, particularly young men, but all men as well. I think the show is a conversation about relationships and about the expectations that we put on women, and some of the pitfalls of modern life for women. But also, it's really a lot through Joe's eyes about the impossible level of expectation that we put on men to be classic romantic heroes in the lives of the young women that they're interested in. And, all he's doing is following the stuff that he has been taught to its logical but extremely unwise conclusion.
Mm-hmm. By bringing up the love story is not cancer story quote.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that.
Sorry, what I was meaning by that is that the story can be both things. Mm-hmm. That cancer wins the battle, but love wins the war.
Right.
And so in a show that so balances an evil tension versus people just trying to do what they think is right or do what they think is right for them, what went into making choices to make sure that balance stayed where it ought to stay, so that I don't feel too much sympathy for Joe, and so that I recognize he's the villain, but at the same time I still follow this story?
We're not trying to control how you're feeling about Joe. We're trying to...
That's my job.
Maybe kind of. We're very interested in the differences in perception from audience, viewer to viewer. Even in the writer's room, there were 6 writers and Greg Berlanti and myself. We had a spectrum from, oh, I'm Team Joe, to, oh my fucking God, I can't believe we're going to do the scene, right? Just among the people who were just inside the book in that one little room. And I expect it to be a little bit the same when people watch the show. I hope, and I anticipate, and I'm kind of delighted by the possibility of like a healthy debate about his behavior. And there's a lot about him that is sympathetic. There's also a lot that's extremely unsympathetic. But I don't think there's anything wrong with relating to Joe a little bit.
There's a I find there's a sadness to Joe's character in that he's taken these lessons to heart to such an nth degree that it's toxic. I think about a couple of years ago, there was a guy who set up in a quad on college campus and was going to play piano until his girlfriend came back to him.
We sent that story around the writers.
And the more you read on that story, it just kind of got sadder and creepier that y'all weren't dating that long and this is over and this would be the crux of an 80s movie.
Yep.
Like Eric Stoltz would rock this.
Exactly.
And we would all be expected to love him at the credits. And I feel like You speaks directly to some of that revisionist conversation that's going on about watching Pretty in Pink now or watching Breakfast Club now. Was it difficult for you to maintain a line of trying to be a relatable person where I understand how you got to there, even though I wouldn't ever want anyone to go there? Was it hard to not become Hannibal Lecter?
I think I probably thought about that a lot, and maybe I worried about that a lot on a bad day. But I think ultimately, the way I approach acting in general is a little bit like the words are going to tell the story. You can't negotiate that, and so I think maybe what I was trying to do more than ever was not concern myself so much with these things that are going to happen and just be present, because if Joe has anything that's going for him, it's like his presence. He watches. It really takes a lot of presence to listen and watch, as opposed to talk about yourself. So. Yeah, it was an exercise in just presence for me on one hand. And then, I think like sometimes I would have this crisis and I would go to Sarah or she wasn't there, or we couldn't talk, maybe I'd go to the director, or maybe I'd just like really think about it for myself, like what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to say? Because maybe I was thinking like, in order to make this real, I don't see how I'm not just going to be totally delusional or sociopathic or whatever it might be. And then I think maybe that was where I just had to trust, like, well, I'm still only one person in this process that we're all orchestrating together. That's the interesting thing about making a show or making anything in the sort of like film medium, is that there's so many different cooks in different kitchens in a way, so I wasn't ever terribly concerned about it in a way that I thought I could control it or I could influence it, because at the end of the day I just was concerned about him being real, and that just meant being present. That may not be a satisfying answer.
I'm glad you brought up trust. I 15 or 20 minutes into the episode, I paused it and looked up the writer's room and who was involved, because I had a moment of being deeply afraid that there's a good sliver of audience who might watch this and not see that Joe's not an 80s romantic character. In fact, I was thrilled. It's a weird choice of words. I was thrilled that the episode culminates with an act of actual violence, of physical violence.
Well, you're going to love this series.
Only because I read the news and there's a sad amount of people who seem to have a line in the sand of like, well, that's not really violence. And so I was kind of glad that like there is no argument by the end of that he's far over the line.
We're not trying to say that ever. Like that's where I think our show is. I often forget along the way because I had to do things, and I'm like, but I think it ends up being emotionally responsible, intellectually responsible, because we don't pull the punches because like for the sake of viewership, It's like, it goes to where it needs to go. It follows. It kind of like it sets up a certain maybe like thesis or something. I don't know how you put it, but like, and then it follows it, and it answers its own questions in a way. And as the viewer, I don't think you get away with liking them without paying a real price. And so to me, that's where it becomes interactive and really interesting and experimental. Like to me, I keep saying, it's like I see it as a social experiment. I'm really fascinated to see what people think of it when it's all said and done, because it puts the onus on you as the viewer to really consider what it is that you're getting from it, you know?
That's the most consistent thing I've heard from readers over the year. Like, I love Joe. Why do I love Joe? What's wrong with me? And I think that's really engaging television.
Yeah. Has it been, I realize in any movie you've read the entire script and pretend like your character doesn't know where this train's going. Did you ever find it difficult to make sure that you played the right level of not knowing how possibly benevolent he is?
I found that Beck has so many issues that she's already aware of that are taking up a lot of her headspace, and that she wasn't thinking in like worst case scenario mindset. So I actually felt like I was able to be present with whatever she was dealing with at any given moment, because she was dealing with so many different factors in her life.
Something I loved about her character in what I've got to see is that she's very smart, very confident. At the same time, she messes up. She is human. And granted, it's a twisted amount of love for her or obsession. But having Joe narrate back that, oh, she's brilliant and she stumbled, but I still love her.
He's forgiving.
That makes me
And honestly, every time the narration gushes and I'm knowing who's saying it, it does make for very engaging drama.
Because if someone's a really good listener and really sees the best in someone and is thoughtful, and a reader in the truest sense of the word, and especially at this moment when we're inundated with so much and so many people have a harder time listening, I think it makes that quality all the more endearing. And
well, and there's a twisted competency. There's an enjoyment to watching anyone do anything very, very well, and he's so observant, even towards a bad end. But it's still fascinating to watch someone stand in the shower and not make a peep when the water comes on.
Yes.
And
it was warm.
But you played it cold.
I know the books versus television or books versus visual medium, where that threat is perceived by me as a reader or as a viewer, it can be a different point. I might not have caught on to just how twisted Joe is. Whereas on television, there was an almost immediate thing. You're watching her too long. Did you just pick up her phone? Can you speak a bit to the discussions of breaking this for television and how to pace?
Yeah. Well, I love what you said, because we knew that he had to commit an act of violence in the first episode, so that we really could mark that territory early. And we felt like it was an important part of the picture that the audience needed to understand fairly early. But something that fascinated me was, certainly when you come into this world in the first episode or two, you are spending a lot of time watching along with Joe. Joe is watching and pursuing this girl that he doesn't know much about. And he is very perceptive, and he does say really interesting things about her, but he's not a reliable narrator. He's not inside her head. He doesn't actually know why she's crying when she cries. He thinks he knows. There are assumptions that he's making. So it was important to us from the beginning that as time went on, and as we as the audience got to know Beth a little bit better, that we switched into her point of view at a certain point, so that we could explore what she's actually thinking, what's actually happening inside her mind. That's something that's a little bit different from the book.
And interestingly, that episode, even though it's kind of bored out by everybody, was written by a man. And then so many of the other episodes where Joe was thinking, and the original book was written by a woman. It's crazy.
I mean, the men in our writer's room are brilliant at writing women. And I like to say, and I say it lovingly about our industry, that there wouldn't be much work for me if I couldn't write men very well, because most of the main characters on TV are men. But the writer's room was 4 women, 2 men, Greg and myself. And I gotta say, it was a rigorous room. Those 2 men were they were representing on a pretty deep level. We had a lot of questions for the men. And just to put a button on that point, 50% of the directors were also female. Most of the executive producers were female. So it was a very the production had what I consider to be a nice balance, in that it was balanced slightly more in favor of women, which I think is right for a project like this, for the thing that we're trying to say.
It's necessary. I'm even realizing now that, even hearing your reflections, there's something I'm recognizing in men's reaction to this, first of all mine, that is different from women's, where I think it could be that maybe women are more just naturally maybe accepting of the potential reality that the show portrays, whereas men are because that is not, it's further from our reality.
Yes.
It's further from our experience. To some of us, it might be totally alien. I don't want to make the division between men and women focused there. I think ultimately we are human, and ultimately there are universal experiences for all of us. And I think that one thing we've been talking about is how men are subject to terrible treatment by other men as well, just even culturally, so that they become terrible men, and because they're believing they have to uphold this impossible standard. But there's something about the way you're troubled by it. I think something about the way that I was troubled by it, having to take on Joe, that I'm even recognizing it could be that women don't have the same reaction, because it's they're yeah.
I felt like a lot of the things that were striking me that Joe was doing as terrifying are things that the women in my life go, that's the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been
cover your drink, lock your phone, don't be alone. That's the world. Whereas that total waste of hair.
I love that line.
Great guy. Not a waste of hair.
When he goes down those. Well, I think he also lies with a bullshit. Of course, I've been to this speakeasy before. But he's clearly walking in a blind. It's not going to go okay. But the confidence of that, I'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought, how many times have I walked into a situation where I assumed I will be fine, because who would come at me?
It's a really good point.
A woman would never do that.
Right.
She'd be like, you want me to go in there?
No.
See ya.
Yeah. It's been such an interesting thing to me about the conversation in the last few months, as #MeToo has been trending. Mm-hmm. The men that I speak to in my life, who I really consider to be very good men, who don't engage in the behaviors that have been publicized and talked about, and rightly have been brought to light on a national and international kind of stage in the last few months. It was eye-opening to them to hear how universal the feeling is. I have to be careful when I walk down the street. I have to be careful how I respond when I'm catcalled. For example, things that seem kind of like minor little microaggressions that we would be able to kind of brush off. It's true. We all, as women walking through the world, we do brush those things off every day. I don't think about it, but there is a very deep primal part of me that is always aware that a wrong move with the wrong person could lead to violence. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is truth in the things that people say about how women are just afraid that they'll be killed.
Mm-hmm. Which is biological.
Yeah.
Yes.
From the beginning of time, that was the case. Mm-hmm. We've always been.
And you don't say to a man, smile, when he's walking down the street. It's just not. That's one of the microaggressions that, for whatever
reason, you say that to me.
They do.
So where I think men can be experiencing that, this show, and it could push any number. And I'm very interested to hear from men who watch the show. This is, as Penn has been saying, part of kind of the social experiment of the show. I do think there's a recognition there when women read the book and when they watch the first episode, where it's just like, oh yeah, what that is the worst case scenario, and it's a worst case scenario that I thought about, and oh, they're presenting it so entertainingly. This is such a subversive way to talk about the worst case scenario that I consider every time I walk into a public space.
Deal with every day. Yeah.
And then the other basic judgments, like if a woman was doing those things, she would be psycho right off the bat if she was looking for someone. But when a man takes that kind of interest, it's still seen as romantic, and he's trying to learn her. And I remember thinking about that when I started the book. Like, yeah, when I do these things, I feel like something's wrong with me.
Yeah, you never wanted Jen to flip the lyrics on country songs.
No.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener-supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/tvdudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TVDudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.